Designing Distributed Work for Performance and Development, an evidence-based framework for HR professionals. Abstract. Distributed work arrangements have evolved from niche practices into mainstream organizational imperatives, accelerated by technological advancement and global disruptions. This article synthesizes research at the intersection of distributed work and work design to offer human resource development (HRD) professionals and managers an integrative framework for designing non-traditional work arrangements that sustain productivity while fostering employee growth. Drawing on job demands resources theory, virtuality frameworks, and empirical evidence spanning multiple industries. We examine the organizational and individual consequences of distributed work and present evidence-based interventions across 5 domains: work design optimization, technology infrastructure and digital literacy, boundary management support, leadership and feedback systems, and psychological contract recalibration. The framework unifies conceptual models to improve understanding of the current landscape and identifies actionable strategies for aligning distributed work with corporate goals, HR policies, and employee development priorities. Organizations that proactively design distributed work systems, rather than reactively accommodate remote arrangements, position themselves to capture productivity gains, enhance employee well-being, and build sustainable competitive advantage in an increasingly virtual economy. The transition from office-centric to distributed work models represents one of the most significant workplace transformations in recent decades. While remote and virtual collaboration existed before 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic compressed years of incremental change into months of forced experimentation. Niffin et al. 2021. Organizations that once viewed telecommuting skeptically found themselves managing fully remote workforces overnight. Now, as the acute crisis recedes, managers and HRD professionals face a more complex challenge: designing sustainable distributed work systems that deliver both organizational performance and meaningful employee development. Lemuvek and Earn. 2023. The stakes are considerable. Research demonstrates that poorly designed distributed work can fragment organizational knowledge. Crampton. 2001, erode employee well-being. Charalampas et al. 2019, and exacerbate inequality. Delat, 2023. Conversely, thoughtfully structured remote arrangements can enhance productivity. Bloom et al. 2015, improve work-life balance. Allen et al. 2015, and expand access to talent. Hopkins and Bardowell, 2023. The difference lies not in whether organizations embrace distributed work, but in how they design, implement, and continuously refine these arrangements. This article addresses that how by synthesizing research from distributed work and work design domains. We establish an integrative framework that helps practitioners understand the conceptual landscape, recognize organizational and individual consequences, and deploy evidence-based interventions. The goal is not to advocate for maximalist remote work policies, but to equip HR professionals with tools to design distributed work systems aligned with their organizational context, workforce characteristics, and strategic priorities. The distributed work landscape. Defining distributed work in contemporary organizations. Distributed work, DW, encompasses employment arrangements where individuals perform job duties outside traditional centralized office settings, often relying on information and communication technologies, ICT, to coordinate with colleagues, access organizational resources, and deliver outcomes. Lemuvek and Earn. 2023. This broad definition includes telework, remote work, hybrid arrangements, virtual teams, and mobile work, terms sometimes used interchangeably but reflecting important distinctions. Telework typically describes arrangements where employees work from home or satellite offices for designated periods while maintaining ties to a primary workplace. Remote work often implies greater geographic flexibility and potentially permanent distance from physical offices. Virtual teams emphasize the collaborative unit, groups whose members are geographically dispersed and coordinate primarily through electronic communication. Hertel et al. 2005. Hybrid work combines office presence with distributed arrangements, creating rhythms of collocation and dispersion. Hopkins and Bardowell. 2023. These distinctions matter for work design. As Gibson and Gibbs, 2006, demonstrate, virtuality exists on a continuum shaped by geographic dispersion, electronic dependence, dynamic structure, and national diversity. A sales team working from home offices in the same metropolitan area faces different coordination challenges than a global product development team spanning multiple time zones and cultures. Understanding these dimensions helps practitioners diagnose design needs specific to their organizational context. Prevalence, drivers, and distribution. Even before the pandemic, distributed work was expanding. Technological infrastructure, cloud computing, collaboration platforms, video conferencing had matured sufficiently to support knowledge work at a distance. Ditz et al. 2019. Organizations seeking cost efficiencies, access to global talent pools, and improved employee retention experimented with flexible work policies. Burke and Ing. 2006. The 2020 global disruption accelerated these trends dramatically. Studies across Europe, North America, and Asia documented sudden shifts to remote work, with white-collar professionals experiencing particularly rapid transitions. Bert et al. 2020. Ibsen et al. 2021. The distribution of distributed work, however, remains uneven. Occupational characteristics strongly predict remote work feasibility. Brugiavini et al. 2022. Knowledge workers in information technology, finance, consulting, and professional services adopted distributed arrangements more readily than those in manufacturing, healthcare, retail, or hospitality. Within organizations, job complexity, task interdependence, and problem-solving requirements moderate the effectiveness of distributed work. Golden and Gajendran. 2019. Roles requiring frequent tacit knowledge exchange or complex coordination may experience diminished performance when fully remote, while those involving focused individual work may thrive. Demographic patterns also emerge. Research suggests that personality traits, particularly conscientiousness and self-regulation capacity, influence distributed work success. Barrick and Mount. 1991. Howe et al. 2019. Career stage matters. Early career employees may struggle to build networks and absorb organizational culture remotely, while experienced professionals leverage established relationships more effectively. Hughes and Nyo. 2021. Gender dynamics warrant attention, as distributed work can simultaneously offer flexibility for caregiving responsibilities and reinforce traditional divisions of domestic labor. Delat. 2023. Organizational and individual consequences of distributed work. Organizational performance impacts. The relationship between distributed work and organizational performance is nuanced, with meta-analytic evidence revealing both benefits and risks. Bloom et al. 2015, conducted a landmark field experiment at a Chinese travel agency, randomly assigning call center employees to work from home or remain in the office for 9 months. Home workers demonstrated 13% higher performance, driven by increased minutes per shift, fewer breaks and sick days, and more calls per minute. Quieter environments. Voluntary turnover decreased by 50% among home workers, yielding substantial cost savings. Notably, performance gains were concentrated among employees with longer tenure and longer commutes, illustrating the importance of individual and contextual factors. Gajendran and Harrison's 2007 meta-analysis of 46 studies found small positive relationships between telecommuting intensity and job satisfaction. performance and perceived autonomy, alongside small negative relationships with work-family conflict. More recent meta-analytic work by Gajendran et al. 2024 proposes a dual pathway model, showing that remote work intensity simultaneously generates positive effects, autonomy, reduced commute stress, and negative effects, professional isolation, reduced visibility, with the balance determining net outcomes. Organizational capability development presents both opportunities and challenges. Grant, 1996, conceptualizes organizational capability as knowledge integration, the ability to synthesize specialized expertise distributed across individuals. Distributed work complicates this integration by reducing spontaneous interactions that facilitate knowledge transfer. Crampton, 2001. The mutual knowledge problem, where team members lack shared understanding of who knows what, intensifies when colleagues rarely interact face-to-face. Organizations investing in deliberate knowledge management systems, structured communication protocols, and periodic co-location events can mitigate these risks while retaining distributed work benefits. Hertel et al. 2005. Resource-based theory suggests that sustained competitive advantage derives from valuable, rare, inimitable, and organized resources. Barney, 1991. Distributed work capabilities, encompassing technology infrastructure, managerial competencies, and organizational routines supporting virtual collaboration, may constitute such strategic resources. Firms that develop superior distributed work systems can access broader talent markets, operate with lower real estate costs, and demonstrate resilience during disruptions. Benitez et al. 2023. However, these advantages depend on systematic investment rather than ad hoc policy adoption. Individual well-being and stakeholder impacts for individual employees. Distributed work creates a complex well-being calculus. Meta-analyses identify several positive pathways: reduced commute time and costs, increased schedule control and autonomy, and improved ability to manage personal responsibilities. Allen et al. 2015. These benefits translate into higher job satisfaction and reduced work-family conflict for many workers. The flexibility to structure one's day around peak productivity periods or integrate exercise, childcare, or elder care can substantially enhance quality of life. Simultaneously, distributed work introduces well-being risks. Professional isolation and loneliness represent significant concerns. Charalampus et al. 2019. The informal social interactions that build relationships and provide emotional support, hallway conversations, lunch gatherings, spontaneous problem-solving sessions, diminish in virtual environments. For some employees, particularly those living alone or early in their careers, this isolation can contribute to psychological distress. Crawford, 2022. Boundary management emerges as a critical challenge. The physical separation between work and home collapses when both occur in the same space, making it difficult to psychologically detach. Allen et al. 2021. Studies during COVID-19 lockdowns documented employees working longer hours, checking messages outside normal schedules, and experiencing difficulty switching off. Ibsen et al. 2021. Individual differences in boundary management style, preference for integrating versus segmenting work and personal life, moderate these experiences. Gardner et al. 2021. The job demands resources. JDR theory provides a useful framework for understanding individual outcomes. Bakker and Demaruti. 2017. Distributed work simultaneously alters both demands, e.g., increased electronic communication requirements, intensified need for self-management, and resources, e.g., greater autonomy, reduced interpersonal conflict from office politics. The balance between demands and resources predicts burnout and engagement. Research by Knight et al. 2022 found that job demands, rather than resources, more strongly predicted worsening psychological distress during early pandemic remote work, suggesting that managing demand intensity is particularly critical. Digital work introduces technology-specific stressors. Constant connectivity creates expectations for immediate responsiveness, JESC, 2022. Video conferencing fatigue, resulting from intense eye contact. Cognitive load of processing nonverbal cues on screens. And reduced mobility, emerged as a widespread complaint, Klonek et al. 2022. Electronic monitoring, when perceived as intrusive surveillance rather than performance support, can erode trust and autonomy, JESC, 2022. Demographic variation in well-being impacts deserves attention. Kaltiainen and Harkonnen, 2024, examined how increased telework during COVID-19 affected employee well-being through work and non-work domains. They found that telework reduced work-related well-being for some groups, particularly those lacking adequate home workspaces or experiencing increased workload, while improving non-work well-being for others, especially those gaining flexibility for family care. These differential effects underscore the importance of avoiding one-size-fits-all approaches. Evidence-based organizational responses work design optimization through task and role clarity. Hackman and Oldhams, 1976. Job characteristics model identified 5 core dimensions that enhance motivation and performance: skill variety, task identity, task significance, autonomy, and feedback. Humphrey et al. 2007, Meta-analytic extension integrated motivational, social, and contextual features, demonstrating that work design fundamentals remain relevant across organizational forms, including distributed arrangements. However, translating these principles to virtual contexts requires deliberate adaptation. Research consistently shows that task characteristics moderate distributed work effectiveness. Golden and Gajendran, 2019, found that job complexity, problem-solving requirements, and task interdependence shape how telecommuting affects performance. Complex, interdependent work benefits from periodic face-to-face interaction to build shared understanding, while focused individual tasks may perform equally well or better remotely. This suggests that HR professionals should conduct task analysis to identify which roles suit full-time distribution, which require hybrid arrangements, and which need primarily co-located staffing. Gibson et al. 2011 extended job design theory to include individual experiences of electronic dependence and copresence as moderators. Their model predicts that the motivating potential of autonomy and feedback depends partly on whether individuals feel connected to colleagues despite physical distance. Organizations can enhance perceived copresence through structured daily check-ins using video rather than audio-only formats. Creating visual presence rituals, virtual office hours, where managers maintain open video sessions for spontaneous consultation. Mimicking drop-in accessibility team norms for camera use during collaborative sessions. Balancing engagement with fatigue prevention, asynchronous collaboration tools, shared documents. Project management platforms that create awareness of others' ongoing work. Hank et al. 2020 examined interactive effects of team virtuality and work design, finding that clearly defined goals, role clarity, and task feedback became more important, not less, in virtual teams. Ambiguity that might be quickly resolved through a brief in-person conversation can persist in distributed teams, consuming time and energy. Organizations should therefore invest in explicit role documentation, decision rights frameworks, and frequent goal clarification. Microsoft implemented a hybrid work guide for managers that provides structured templates for defining role requirements, collaboration needs, and schedule expectations. Rather than adopting blanket policies, teams conduct quarterly planning sessions to assess which tasks require synchronous collaboration, which can proceed asynchronously, and when physical presence adds value. This approach acknowledges variation across functions. Product development teams might schedule intensive co-located sprint periods, while customer support teams operate effectively with continuous distribution, while maintaining organizational coherence. Technology infrastructure and digital literacy development. Technology infrastructure constitutes a foundational resource for distributed work success. Chadi et al. 2021 studied hospitality organizations during COVID-19, finding that digital technology capability, encompassing both tools and employee competencies, mediated the relationship between remote work intensity and performance. Organizations that had invested in cloud infrastructure, collaboration platforms, and cybersecurity systems transitioned more successfully than those relying on legacy on-premises systems. However, providing technology alone proves insufficient. Ditz et al. 2019 argue that facilitating digital work requires integrated attention to technology, spaces, organizational culture, and employee skills. Digital literacy, the ability to effectively use digital tools, evaluate information quality, collaborate in virtual environments, and maintain digital well-being, becomes a core competency requiring systematic development. ECUMA 2024. Effective technology-enabled distributed work includes platform rationalization and integration, reducing proliferation of disconnected tools, establishing primary platforms for communication, e.g. Microsoft Teams, Slack, collaboration, e.g. SharePoint, Google Workspace, and project management, e.g. Asana, Jira, user experience optimization, ensuring interfaces are intuitive, providing adequate bandwidth and equipment, establishing technical support accessible across time zones, cybersecurity and data governance, implementing VPNs, multi-factor authentication, and endpoint protection without creating friction that drives workarounds, clarifying data classification and handling protocols, accessibility considerations, ensuring technologies accommodate diverse abilities, languages, and working contexts. Addressing digital divides related to home internet quality or device access. Benitez et al. 2023 examined how Spanish firms transformed IT-enabled remote work initiatives during the pandemic. Organizations that treated technology deployment as a socio-technical system change, combining infrastructure investment with training, change management, and iterative refinement, achieved superior outcomes compared to those focused purely on tool distribution. Salesforce established a digital-first operating model that prioritized asynchronous communication and documentation while maintaining intentional synchronous moments. The company invested heavily in employee training covering effective writing for clarity, video meeting facilitation skills, and asynchronous collaboration norms. Managers received specialized development on providing feedback and coaching in virtual environments. This comprehensive capability-building approach recognizes that technology creates opportunities, but human capability determines whether organizations capture them. Boundary management support and well-being resources. Allen et al. 2021 investigated boundary management and work-non-work balance while working from home, finding that organizations can substantially influence employee boundary experiences through policies, norms, and manager behaviors. While individual preferences for boundary management styles vary, Gardner et al. 2021 organizational context shapes whether employees feel supported in their preferred approach. Effective boundary management support addresses both segmentation, creating clear separation between work and personal domains, and integration, allowing flexible blending strategies. Rather than mandating one approach, organizations can establish core collaboration hours, e. g. 10 a.m. 3 p.m., when synchronous availability is expected. Protecting mornings and evenings for focused work or personal commitments. Normalize, status, transparency, available. In deep work, offline, through calendar management and platform settings. Reducing ambiguity about responsiveness. Expectations. Provide workspace setup resources, stipends for home office equipment. Ergonomic assessments, guidance on creating dedicated work zones, even in small living spaces. Model healthy boundaries from leadership, executives visibly protecting personal time. Not sending messages outside working hours, discussing their own boundary practices. Detmers and Plukhan, 2022, studied sudden work from home transitions. Identifying recovery from work as a critical mechanism linking distributed work to well-being. Organizations that actively encouraged breaks, discouraged after-hours messaging, and supported employees' ability to psychologically detach saw better well-being outcomes. Simple interventions, like disabling mobile notifications outside core hours or email systems that delay send until morning, can reinforce boundary norms. Delanuage and Verbruggen, 2020, conducted a quasi-experimental study showing that telework effects on work-life balance and well-being varied substantially between and within individuals across time. This variability suggests the need for personalized rather than uniform approaches. Some organizations conduct individual, working agreements, discussions between employees and managers. Addressing preferred work locations, schedule patterns, communication preferences, and boundary needs. This contracting process creates explicit rather than assumed expectations. Unilever implemented a Flex Experiences framework allowing employees to select from curated flexible work patterns, e.g. focused flexibility for deep work, collaborative flexibility for team-intensive roles, boundary flexibility for caregiving. Each pattern includes guidance on appropriate boundary management strategies, technology settings, and manager support practices. Employees can adjust patterns quarterly based on changing personal circumstances or project demands, creating dynamic rather than static arrangements. Leadership, feedback systems, and team functioning. Distributed work fundamentally alters leadership dynamics. Traditional supervisory approaches relying on physical observation and informal interaction become impractical. Hertel et al. 2005. Research on virtual teams identifies communication, trust, and feedback as critical leadership functions requiring intentional design. Julbone and Hock. 2017. Handke et al. 2022. Examined feedback in virtual team effectiveness, finding that regular, specific, developmental feedback predicted team performance and learning, even more so than in co-located teams. The absence of informal feedback moments, quick hallway updates, body language reading during presentations, means scheduled feedback conversations must compensate. Organizations can strengthen virtual feedback systems through structured one-on-one cadences, weekly or bi-weekly individual check-ins with standard agendas, progress updates, obstacle removal, development discussions, real-time collaborative feedback, using shared screens and documents to provide immediate input during work sessions rather than asynchronous comments. Team retrospectives, regular reflection sessions examining what's working, what's challenging, and what to adjust, borrowed from agile methodologies but applicable broadly. Multi-source input, leveraging collaboration platform data, e.g. responsiveness patterns, contribution frequency, alongside qualitative manager observations and peer feedback. Bell and Kozlowski, 2002, developed a virtual team typology highlighting that leadership requirements vary with team task, temporal scope, and membership stability. Remote sales teams with individual accountability need different leadership than cross-functional innovation teams or ongoing service delivery units. Customizing leadership approaches to team characteristics improves effectiveness. Trust emerges as a particularly critical factor in virtual environments. Handy, 1995, famously asked whether trust is possible in virtual organizations where colleagues rarely meet face-to-face. Subsequent research demonstrates that trust develops differently, not necessarily less effectively, in distributed teams. Progressing through initial swift trust based on professional credentials and category membership, toward knowledge-based trust built through reliable interactions and demonstrated competence, Hertel et al. 2005. Organizations can facilitate trust development by creating early interaction opportunities, establishing clear communication norms, and ensuring visible accountability. Klonek and Parker, 2021, propose smart teamwork design principles for virtual contexts, synchronous and asynchronous work balanced appropriately. Motivation through meaningful task design and recognition. Autonomy with accountability. Relational aspects maintained through deliberate connection. Technology enabling rather than constraining. These principles translate to practical interventions like distinguishing which decisions require real-time discussion versus asynchronous input. And scheduling, collaboration sprints, for intensive teamwork periods. GRT Lab, operating as a fully distributed company with 2,000+ employees across 65+ countries, maintains extensive public documentation of its remote work practices. The company emphasizes asynchronous communication as default, requiring written documentation of decisions and discussions. All company video calls occur monthly but are recorded for those unable to attend live. Managers receive training in handbook first leadership, documenting processes and decisions in searchable knowledge bases rather than relying on oral tradition. This approach builds institutional memory despite distributed operations. Continuous learning and development opportunities. Human resource development in distributed contexts requires rethinking traditional training delivery and informal learning mechanisms. Bennett and Health, 2011, anticipated that virtual work would demand paradigm shifts in HRD practice, emphasizing self-directed learning, technology-mediated development, and distributed communities of practice. These predictions have largely materialized. Bird, 2022, addresses creating cultures of inclusion and belonging in remote environments that sustain meaningful work, a foundation for employee growth. When employees feel isolated or disconnected, learning and development efforts suffer. Organizations must therefore integrate inclusion into learning design, not treat it as separate. Effective approaches include cohort-based virtual learning programs, creating peer learning groups that progress through development experiences together, building relationships alongside skills mentorship and coaching networks, formalizing relationships that might occur organically in offices. Using matching algorithms or interest-based pairing to connect distributed employees. Communities of practice platforms, digital spaces for employees with shared professional interests, e.g. data scientists, project managers, emerging leaders, to exchange knowledge, solve problems, and learn from each other. Action learning projects, cross-functional teams tackling real organizational challenges as development vehicles. Emphasizing application over abstract training. Ellsbach and Hagedorn, 2006, demonstrate that mindless, routine work creates cognitive space for creative problem-solving and learning. In distributed environments with fewer spontaneous breaks and transitions, organizations may need to actively create these spaces, for example, optional virtual coffee chats without agendas or designated learning hours when employees explore new topics without immediate productivity expectations. Technology enables new learning modalities while requiring new competencies. Ekumas, 2024, systematic review of AI and automation in HRD identifies opportunities for personalized learning pathways, intelligent tutoring systems, and performance support tools that adapt to individual needs. However, these technologies also create requirements for digital literacy, self-regulation, and critical evaluation of algorithm-generated recommendations. Siemens, the global technology conglomerate, established a digital learning campus, providing on-demand learning resources, virtual instructor-led courses, and peer learning communities accessible to distributed employees worldwide. The platform integrates with workflow tools, surfacing relevant learning content based on employees' current projects and development goals. Learning analytics identify skill gaps and recommend pathways, while managers receive dashboards showing team learning activity and capability development. This systemic approach treats continuous learning as integral to distributed work design rather than an afterthought. Building long-term distributed work capability, psychological contract recalibration and mutual expectations. The shift to distributed work fundamentally alters the psychological contract, employees' beliefs about mutual obligations between themselves and their organization. Rousseau, 1995, as applied in this domain. Traditional contracts often implicitly assumed physical presence, face time with leadership, and boundary between work and home. Distributed work disrupts these assumptions, requiring explicit renegotiation. Bird, 2022. Organizations building sustainable distributed work capability must address several contractual dimensions, performance expectations and evaluation criteria, shifting from presence-based to output-based assessment, clarifying deliverables and timelines, establishing transparent metrics that don't disadvantage remote workers. Research by Jesk, 2022, on electronic monitoring during COVID-19 revealed employee concerns about surveillance substituting for trust. Organizations that collaboratively defined performance indicators with employees, rather than imposing monitoring, maintained higher trust levels. Career development and advancement, ensuring distributed workers access equal development opportunities and promotion consideration. Delatz, 2023. Analysis warns that remote work can inadvertently reproduce gender inequality when women disproportionately select flexibility while men maintain visibility, enhancing office presence. Addressing this requires deliberate interventions, rotation of high-visibility projects across remote and office workers, explicit inclusion criteria for advancement that don't privilege proximity, and transparency about decision-making processes. Work intensity and availability, establishing norms about working hours, response time expectations, and all-fouls contact. The right to disconnect legislation emerging in multiple jurisdictions reflects recognition that distributed work can intensify rather than reduce work demands without clear boundaries. Ibsen et al. 2021. Progressive organizations proactively define these boundaries through policies and manager modeling. Social connection and belonging, acknowledging that relationships and culture building constitute organizational responsibilities, not just individual pursuits. Bird, 2022, emphasizes that creating inclusion and belonging in remote environments requires intentional design, budget for virtual social events, structured relationship-building activities, and recognition programs that celebrate contributions regardless of location. Adaptive operating models and governance structures. Long-term distributed work success requires evolution beyond temporary accommodations toward redesigned operating models. Hopkins and Bardowell, 2023, studied how Australian organizations designed sustainable hybrid work models post-pandemic, identifying several patterns, differentiated approaches by function and role, rather than organization-wide mandates. Successful firms developed frameworks allowing variation. Customer-facing teams might maintain different patterns than R&D groups. Individual contributors different from people managers. This differentiation requires governance frameworks establishing decision rights. Typically, managers make recommendations within organization-wide parameters, with HR ensuring equity and consistency. Physical space reconceptualization. Offices transform from assigned workstations to collaboration hubs, featuring more meeting spaces, social areas, and project rooms with fewer individual desks. Real estate strategies shift towards smaller headquarters with regional co-working partnerships or flexible leasing. These changes realize cost savings while creating intentional reasons for office presence, the office as destination rather than default. Rhythm and cadence planning, establishing organizational, team, and individual rhythms, for example, quarterly all-hands gatherings, monthly team co-location days, weekly synchronous collaboration windows. These rhythms create predictability that supports planning and equity. Everyone knows when presence matters. Continuous experimentation and refinement, treating distributed work design as ongoing learning rather than one-time implementation. Organizations conduct regular pulse surveys, focus groups, and data analysis examining utilization patterns, performance trends, and well-being indicators. Korfeld et al. 2022, used Delphi methods to project future mobile and virtual work trends, emphasizing that successful organizations will maintain agility as technologies and workforce expectations evolve. Atlassian, the collaboration software company, introduced Team Anywhere policies allowing employees to work from office, home, or anywhere with appropriate infrastructure. The company redesigned offices as collaboration spaces rather than individual workstations. Requires teams to document decision-making and project status asynchronously. And established quarterly team days when entire teams gather regardless of normal work patterns. Governance includes team-level working agreements developed collaboratively, manager training on leading distributed teams, and regular assessment of policy effectiveness through employee experience data. Future-focused capability development and workforce planning. Building long-term distributed work capability requires anticipating technological evolution, demographic shifts, and competitive dynamics. Several capability areas merit sustained investment: self-leadership and proactive work behaviors. Kim et al. 2024. Position self-leadership, the ability to influence one's own motivation, cognition and behavior toward goal achievement, as increasingly critical for distributed work. Self-leadership includes strategies like self-goal setting, self-monitoring, self-reward, and constructive thought patterns. HRD interventions can systematically develop these competencies through training, coaching, and performance support. Digital fluency and collaborative technology adoption, as collaboration platforms evolve, incorporating artificial intelligence, virtual augmented reality, and advanced analytics, workforce digital capabilities must advance correspondingly. Hu et al. 2024. Organizations treating technology adoption as continuous learning rather than one-time deployment maintain competitive advantage. Cross-cultural and global collaboration competence. Distributed work enables truly global teams, creating opportunities for diversity of perspective alongside challenges of cultural difference, time zone management, and language variation. Gibson and Gibbs, 2006, identified national diversity as a key virtuality dimension affecting innovation. Developing intercultural competence, inclusive communication practices, and global mindset becomes essential for distributed workforce effectiveness. Resilience and adaptability, the capacity to navigate ambiguity, recover from setbacks, and adapt to changing circumstances predicts success in distributed environments with fewer direct supports. Crawford, 2022. HRD can foster resilience through psychological skills training, supportive leadership development, and organizational cultures that normalize learning from failure. Knowledge management and organizational memory. Crampton's, 2001, mutual knowledge problem intensifies as organizations scale distributed operations. Systematic knowledge management practices, documentation standards, searchable repositories, expertise directories, and knowledge transfer processes prevent critical knowledge from remaining tacit or residing only with specific individuals. Conclusion: distributed work represents not merely a location shift but a fundamental work design transformation requiring systematic organizational response. The evidence synthesized in this article demonstrates that distributed arrangements produce widely varying outcomes depending on how they are designed, implemented, and supported. Organizations that approach distributed work strategically, assessing task characteristics, investing in technology and capability development, supporting boundary management, redesigning leadership practices, and continuously adapting, can achieve performance gains while enhancing employee well-being and development. The integrative framework presented here offers HR professionals and managers a roadmap spanning immediate interventions and long-term capability building. Short-term priorities include establishing clear work design principles tailored to distributed contexts, deploying appropriate technology infrastructure with accompanying training, creating boundary management supports, and training leaders in virtual team management. Longer-term imperatives involve recalibrating psychological contracts, evolving operating models and governance structures, and building workforce capabilities in self-leadership, digital fluency, and adaptive expertise. Several principles warrant emphasis as organizations navigate this transformation. First, avoid one-size-fits-all approaches. Distributed work effectiveness depends on task characteristics, individual preferences, and organizational context. Second, treat distributed work as a socio-technical system requiring integrated attention to technology, work processes, social dynamics, and individual capabilities rather than isolated policy decisions. Third, maintain equity and inclusion vigilance to prevent distributed work from inadvertently advantaging already privileged employees while marginalizing others. Fourth, embrace continuous experimentation and learning, recognizing that optimal designs will evolve as technologies mature and workforce expectations shift. The organizations that will thrive in increasingly distributed futures are those that view this transformation not as a temporary accommodation but as an opportunity to fundamentally reimagine how work gets designed, performed, and developed. By thoughtfully applying the evidence-based interventions and capability-building strategies outlined here, HR professionals can position their organizations to capture the considerable benefits of distributed work while mitigating its risks, ultimately creating work environments that sustain both organizational performance and human flourishing.